Got a very interesting question here from Madison, who says, Dear Dr. Anders, I am a 25-year-old dating a Reformed Presbyterian / Anglican man, and I am doing my best to share my faith with him. His biggest hang-up about the Catholic Church is papal infallibility, and specifically how we can know what is an infallible statement and what is not. He often brings up unum sanctum and other papal documents that say there is no salvation outside the Catholic Church, and points out how these statements are clearly contradicted in Vatican II. So I was wondering if you could shed some light on the context of some of these documents and speak to the usefulness of the Magisterium or the papacy when they cause more apparent confusion than clarity. Thank you so much, Madison.
Okay, thanks. I really appreciate the question, and I'll do that. But before I talk about the interpretation of papal statements and the doctrine of infallibility, I'd like to talk about the doctrine of infallibility as it was articulated by John Calvin within the Reformed tradition to which your boyfriend, fiance belongs. One of the assertions of the Reformed tradition is that a man, or a woman for that matter, can have an infallible knowledge of their own election. So you will find a doctrine of infallibility within the Reformed tradition. It's not necessarily the infallible interpretation of the Bible, but it's the infallible interpretation of one's own spiritual state before God. This is an article of faith in the Westminster Confession. You can have this infallible certainty. On what grounds? Entirely subjective criteria, right? And so I would like to point out that the Reformed don't have a problem with infallibility. They just want it for themselves, right? And they don't want to ascribe it to somebody else. And they want to ascribe it to their own most interior feelings and subjective experiences, not to something objective in the world. The Catholic doctrine is that the Church is infallible when it teaches the faith and morals of the Church, of the Christian religion, which it doesn't always do, in an infallible mode, but it can, with authority, say this is a Christian thing that you must believe, this is a Christian thing that you must do. And the great virtue of having an infallible church is that we are not reduced to interpreting a text. And so Protestants have a hard time getting their head out of the idea that the way you know the faith is from a text. And so they think that what Catholics believe is you have Scripture here, and then you have this collection of texts that have been handed down by papal authority, and the job of the individual Catholic is to somehow align all of these propositions together in a coherent sequence. That's the way Protestants do theology, right? Their textual basis is the Bible, and the work of theology for a Protestant is trying to fit the diverse statements of Scripture together into a coherent system. A task, I might add, that they're not always very good at because there are so many diverse systems within Protestantism, and they can't come to agreement about it. Right? But that's not the task of the Catholic. The job of a Catholic is not to line the Bible up together with so many infallible pronouncements of popes and councils and then try to make coherent sense of them and make them all fit together. The point of having a magisterium is that it's alive. We have a living magisterium, and the magisterium has the job of interpreting the magisterium. And if you didn't get it the first time, they try again. The Christological councils of the first 4 centuries are an ideal example of this. So we had the Council of Nicaea. They said, you know what? Jesus is God. We mean it. Capital G, full stop, exclamation mark, God. Did you hear it? We said it the first time, God. Not God, not a hamburger, not a donut, God. You understand what we're saying? And the Catholic world said yes, and then proceeded to not understand what they were saying. Oh, boy. And so then they had the Council of Constantinople, and they said, we really meant it when we said God in Nicaea. Here's how we're going to say it again. That didn't take. They had the Council of Ephesus. Then they had the Council of Chalcedon, continually refining and emphasizing the fundamental doctrine that Jesus Christ is God. Right, and then to make matters worse, they had to do it again at the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, right? So they just keep going and keep going and keep going. The virtue of having a magisterium is it can always clarify what it means. And it definitely looks back to previous popes' declarations and contextualizes them. And so unum sanctum, for example, is within the context of a medieval Christendom in which everybody was Catholic. I mean, you were either a Jew or you were a Catholic. And if you defected from the Catholic faith, you were a heretic. And within that context, it makes perfect sense for Boniface VIII to say, you have to be obedient to the Pope. I mean, if you're a Catholic, yes, you do. Yes, you do. Right? But what do you do? What do you do 500 years later when you have a civilization where people are growing up baptized, but neither they, nor their parents, nor their grandparents, nor their great-grandparents were in communion with the Bishop of Rome and have been taught to believe that the Bishop of Rome is the Antichrist? So you get to the 19th century, Pius IX, who is nobody's idea of a bleeding liberal, says people who've been raised in that condition have to be obedient to their consciences, because Catholic Church also says that conscience is where the buck stops. Mm-hmm. Right? And so they can be saved through their invincible ignorance of the truth of the Catholic faith. It doesn't undo unum sanctum. It clarifies the context of its application.
Okay. Well,